Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clark, joined by Chris Reifer. Big weekend for PTFC up in Seattle. 2-0 win for the Thorns. One of their best, if not the best, win of the season for them. And then a pretty brutal 0-0 draw between the Sounders and Timbers. A solid enough result for the Timbers in a difficult stretch of their season, but as Gio said, as others have said, it's not enough, especially given where they are in the table. We'll start with the Thorns, though. Very much an entertaining match between two of the best teams in NWSL. The rain gave the Thorns their best shot, and the Thorns responded with a comprehensive victory that could have been 3 or 4 goals, but ended up 2-0, and was, I think, the best performance of the season to show the rest of the NWSL that, hey, we're still here, we're still the best team, and this is why. So, Chris, you were able to watch both games. What was your impression of that Thorns match?
Thorns play like that, or even near that level, consistently over the course of the rest of the season, they're winning the double. Simple as that. Phenomenal performance. I mean, like, just an absolute masterclass in how to manage a soccer game. They went out, they got the early goal. They deserved the early goal. They played really well in that first half, especially. But even then, from that point, I mean, look, it's not going to be a game that you're going to totally dominate. The Reign are good. The Reign are at home. They're really good players on the other side. Like, that's not a game that you're going to just overrun by any means. And so when the situation called for the Thorns to absorb, they absorbed. When the situation, opened up for the Thorns to counter a little bit, they did. When the game allowed the Thorns to dominate a little bit more and to carry the game a bit, they did. I think, that's how you win soccer games. Right there. That's an absolute masterclass. It was a mature performance. It was effective. The Thorns were dangerous pretty consistently. The Reign definitely had some chances, but again, that's just going to happen. That's what happens when you play good teams on the road. And the Thorns managed those situations well. They did a good job of making sure that the chances weren't super clear chances. And then when they had the opportunity to kill it off, they killed it off. That's how you win soccer games. That's how you do it. And so I am as impressed by that Thorns performance as I've been impressed by certainly any performance from them this year. And I think they've had some good ones to date. But hang that one in the Louvre. That is a phenomenal performance from that Thorns team. A comprehensive one. I think you can shout out a number of players, but Sam Coffey was, a level above every other player on the field. It was a near perfect performance from a 6. And that is so much when you have a fulcrum like that, a rock for the team, that helps you manage the different ebbs and flows that the game is going to give you. And when you have a 6 who can do a number of different things, who can defend well, who makes good decisions with the ball, who can maintain tempo and do all of that, then you can do that to sort of ride the various waves that a game like that is going to give you. And she was unbelievable. Eric Williamson commenting on Twitter during the game, how is she not on in the women's national team roster for the upcoming World Cup? I guess there's a theoretical chance, but not really. Those preliminary rosters are going to be dropping pretty soon. Full rosters in early July. I think everybody understands that Coffey is not going to be on there, and I agree with him. That's a miss from Vlatko Andonovski. His failure to integrate her, the way she plays and the way she showed and the level that she showed in that game, absolutely should be on the plane. And so, yeah, and when your 6 is playing as well as that makes it so much easier for everybody else. And I think that's exactly what we saw. So, how did I feel about the Thorns performance? Blown away, to be honest. And if that is what we're going to see from them, they're going to win the double.
Yeah, the first goal for Sophia Smith in 7 games, so really a tough stretch for her.
Tough stretch. She's been dominating and registering assists. I don't know, I think she's still been very good through almost all of this stretch.
I think so too. It was more a tough stretch for her personally. Like she felt that way because she wasn't scoring goals. Obviously, the fact that she's added the additional playmaking ability to her game has allowed her to continue to be playing at an MVP level. She now, with this one goal, the first in like 7 games, is tied for the league lead with Crystal Dunn and a couple other players, including Alex Morgan and Lynn Williams. It's she's still having a great season. It's just, if she had scored a couple of goals in that stretch, it would be an even better one statistically, and she would have more confidence than she did during that stretch where she was definitely frustrated, and understandably so. She's a goal scorer. She wants to put the ball in the back of the net. And if she was doing so at the clip that she did last year, I mean, she'd have some pretty eye-popping numbers right now. She already has the best assist and goal numbers in the league.
I mean, 9 goal contributions in 10 games. I'm good. Like I got no criticisms. That is very good. I'll take it every day of the week from every player in the league.
And what a testament to how great she is that there could be more out of a season like that so far, right? But great for her to get a little more confidence after scoring that early goal. A really strong finish from her to be expected. Christine Sinclair gets her goal in the second half to basically seal the deal.
And a nice performance from Sink.
And a really strong performance. Yeah, she came off the bench and was, what they needed her to be. Yeah. And she stepped up and booted one in that was just classic Christine Sinclair. She scored that exact type of goal, dozens, if not hundreds of times.
On a beautiful team move as well.
Yeah. Morgan Weaver being the catalyst for that team move, and somebody who the last several games has really upped her level of play and become, one of their most important players, and somebody who, when the World Cup players all leave, is going to be the leader, one of the leaders of this team as they make it through that stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think a lot of that also is sort of unlocked by the two-way work that Crystal Dunn did in this one. Folks have talked, as you just mentioned, about Dunn's attacking output over the course of the season. It still baffles me somewhat that we're talking about her primarily as a left back for the national team. That feels like a take that's 2 years old at this point. But nonetheless, there are smarter people than I that are thinking about these things. I think a lot of the discussion this year, and because she scored 5 goals, has been about Dunn's attacking output. Her two-way play in this game as sort of a true 8 is what allows Sinclair to come in the 70th or so minute and be a free-floating kind of 10 sort of presence that both minimizes her weaknesses in terms of her mobility and her two-way play, but also really capitalizes on her on her both her goal scoring and her playmaking ability, which is still very, very good when deployed correctly. And so I thought Sink was great. I thought Sink was put in exactly the right spot in which Sink can be great. I think that is sort of how she's best used just at this point of her career. And I think the Thorns prospered because of it. I agree entirely on Weaver. This was a game where Weaver was a little bit quieter than she has been in some recent weeks for a stretch. But then really, as the Thorns really started to dominate that last 20 minutes, which when you have a game that's back and forth like that, like this one was through most of the heart of the game, the Reign certainly had some periods in which they had the better of the ball and created some chances. It was a little bit back and forth. When you get to a point where the tide sort of shifts back in your favor in the latter stages of the game, like this did for the Thorns very decidedly, that is the mark of a very well-managed game. And when that happened, Weaver became much, much more dangerous and was a really important part of the Thorns dominating that last stretch. I thought she very well deserved the assist on that great move, did an awesome job to unlock the byline. And to open up that cutback, perfect run from Sink and perfect finish. That's how ruthless teams put games away, and don't give the Reign a window to get something out of it. That's a Reign team that the Thorns, I mean, they haven't beaten them in a minute, right? Up until this weekend, and that's given the Thorns a lot of trouble. And frankly, the Reign have scratched a lot of draws and even wins out of games that when you looked at the balance of the play, they probably didn't quite deserve those, right? The Thorns played okay against the Reign a fair amount in this stretch, but they've just dropped results. Not happening here. And it wasn't happening here because of, I mean, frankly, I think just collective buy-in, collective intelligence, and the ruthlessness to be able to slam the door when they had the opportunity to do so. But when we look back a couple of weeks and we were talking about this Thorns team's difficulty playing with wins, this is what we were saying they needed to do. That's it. Like when we were talking about what the solutions were to that, this was the solution.
Yeah, to slam the door and to get this like culture type win, right? This one that shows, yes, these players that have been together through thick and thin through 2 years, who have had so much success, many of whom are veterans of NWSL, like they are who people expected them to be, and to break out of what was, as you alluded to, kind of an identity crisis for them for a few games where they had those 2 3-3 draws, and then they lost their first game of the season. They came back from Houston and were genuinely feeling a bit uneasy about how things were going, and this is a confident group. This is a mindful group for the most part. There are some young players who are still learning the mindfulness that veterans like Becky Sauerbrunn, Megan Klingenberg, Christine Sinclair possess. But they were all, top to bottom in a bit of a questioning spot. And this result, it allows them to truly and fully, I think, break out of that. A win over a lower tier NWSL team, that's what they expect to do. They don't really care nearly as much about that as a result like this to show who they are.
And slamming the door doesn't always mean trying to win 4-0. I think that's the trap that they've gotten into at times over the course of the last couple of months is when they get that first goal thinking, oh, we're just going to pour it on. This wasn't a game in which the situation called for just trying to pour it on, because the Reign are good, especially when they can work down the wings and work in the open field a little bit. That if you're too aggressive, they absolutely have the weapons to be able to punish you for that. And that's not what the Thorns tried to do. That is the change. And that is the game management stuff that I think they were lacking, and they showed it in spades up in Seattle. So I mean, it frankly was a real pleasure to watch, because if you are enough of a nerd about soccer and watch enough games like this, you develop a sense of when teams are good at controlling games. And even when the Reign had good moments in that game, the Thorns were still under control. There was no moment in which the Thorns were hanging by a thread. And then to see them sort of, absorb some punches, take a little bit from the Reign, while remaining dangerous. It's not like the Thorns were ever in a shell by any means. And then push the tide back in the other direction to the point where they could win it going away. I mean, it's beautiful stuff. Credit to the players, credit to the coaching staff, to everybody who put everything into getting that win. That is a signature win, and that's the type of win that if that's the level, it's going to be a trophy-filled season.
Yeah, a really exciting and historic one if they can keep that up. It was a really tough game in terms of the performance by the Reign. Like they gave them their best shot, and Megan Rapinoe had like a virtuoso performance, like up and down the field throughout the game. She was a problem for them, and they handled it terrifically well. And they handled, some brief moments of adversity very well. I thought Bella Bixby, fighting through some pain, she had some hip soreness, I think is how Mike Norris described it. She made some great saves, and they weren't like making up for issues at the back type saves, which she's had to do plenty of in recent weeks. They were just genuine moments of quality from the Reign that she had to be there to stifle, and she did. Becky Sauerbrunn returned for a few minutes. We'll see how she recovers from her injury. The back line overall, I think Kelly Hubley played well. Mangus was in there at the start, and she has proven a solid veteran presence after a shakier start to the season than maybe she would have hoped for coming back from injuries. But Mangus is another one that during this World Cup break, like she's going to be one of the leaders that binds this group together and continues to push for results as the rest of the league finds itself in the same type of situation as the Thorns, albeit not nearly as depleted as the Thorns will be, considering how many national team players are going to be gone. But, big test of depth, right? And I think the Thorns have that and have got young players coming into their own as well. Rana Reyes, I think, has been really, really solid the last few games and has looked more professional as she's had these few weeks to adjust.
Really good few weeks for Rana.
Yeah, to adjust to the speed of the game
coming into the stretch.
Yeah, it is. It's massive, and she's going to have to step in there for Natalia Kuika, who will be gone for the World Cup for however long Finland is in it, right? And to have Megan Klingenberg on the other side will be, welcome as well. 3 games left for the Thorns until basically the whole team leaves, right? So you got Orlando on the 11th on the road. That's this Sunday. Chicago Red Stars the following Sunday on the road. And they return home to have one pretty solid test against Washington again on the 23rd.
Mark Parsons returned to Providence Park.
Yes, Mark Parsons back to Providence Park. There'll be a lot of emotion in that game. It'll be a good matchup between two of the better teams in the league this season, and I think a good send off final test for the full team before 3 days later is when the NWSL releases its players for the World Cup. Not everybody will leave immediately. There are some players like Rocky Rodriguez who are rehabbing injuries that will likely stick around and do so here until they need to travel to Australia and New Zealand. There's a send-off game that the U.S. will play before they head off. That'll be down in San Jose. But yeah, I mean, after the game on the 23rd, like it's going to be a much more mixed group for the Thorns, and then a lot of the eyes of the soccer world will shift to Australia and New Zealand.
You pointed out Emily Menges, and I want to just circle back to this because I think this is sort of it's just an important lesson in putting players, and we talked about it sort of with Sink, and putting players in the right circumstances to be successful. Emily Menges is a player who has been a good defender in NWSL now for a long time. As we've seen this season, that when she's sort of stranded in space, she's going to struggle a bit more. And the Reign have plenty of pieces in their attack that can exploit. I mean, Veronica Latsko is I think one of the NWSL players of the month, if I remember right. Has had a huge month for the Reign. She was out after 60 minutes in this game because the Thorns did such a good job of keeping her under control. Megan Rapinoe, Bethany Balsler. I mean, these are all good players, and I acknowledge that the Reign have some questions up top, but there are plenty of weapons in the attack to more than make up for it. But instead of letting Menges get exposed against these really good players in space where she struggles, the Thorns were just a lot more pragmatic in not allowing many of those moments to happen. And Menges was good. and so it really is just a matter of understanding the personnel that you have and playing in a way that puts them in a position to be successful. And I think Menges was plenty good enough to finish that game. Obviously, they wanted to get Sauerbrunn some minutes to get her built back up. And Becky was very good when she came in. But that's the kind of performance that if previously you were thinking, oh boy, what are they going to do when Sauerbrunn leaves for the World Cup and she's going to be gone for a longer stretch? They're going to do that. And it worked. Kelly Hubley and Emily Menges, they're going to be here. Megan Klingenberg, she's going to be here. Rana Reyes, who you talked about, has been very good recently. She's going to be here. Sam Coffey's going to be here. That is how you do it. Morgan Weaver is going to be here. Olivia Moultrie, she's going to be here. That is how you do it. And so, I think the vision is becoming clear, and in part because of some improved individual performances, but also just because of a little bit of a sharpening approach from the team, how it's going to work even after this 3-game stretch. But as you talk about this 3-game stretch before the World Cup departures, all 3 are winnable, right? 2 road games against pretty weak opponents. I just have to throw a little bit of shade, a little interlude at Angel City, a team that even a couple weeks ago I was like, I think they're better than the record indicates. They lost at home to the Red Stars, which is not good. As we saw, the Red Stars, when a team plays well against them, the Red Stars aren't competitive. The Red Stars beat Angel City at home. It has been just a disastrous beginning of the season to Angel City. And at this point, you gotta I've kind of gotta come off my they're better than the record thing, because they just are the record at this point. But
yeah, they've had some injuries too, but
no question.
At this point, it's the results like that you can't have against a Red Stars team that is depleted, to say the least.
Amandine Henry will help them when she gets in, but again, she's not meaningfully going to get in before the World Cup. That's going to be after the World Cup. The season's over by then for that Angel City team. But the Red Stars, as we saw just a few weeks ago, they are a beatable team. The Pride, as we've seen, are a beatable team. These are teams that the Thorns have beaten at a canter at home. Harder on the road. They're going to have to play well. They can't take any of these games lightly. But if they go and they play well, if they bring anything near that level that they showed in Seattle, they will win those games. And then I agree. Really good, really interesting matchup against the Spirit at home. And I think that's very much a game that can be a send-off. But would you expect the Thorns to win that game? You would, because of what the Thorns have shown, having the home field advantage. I think you'd expect the Thorns to win that one. And if they can do that, they're top of the table right now, tied with the Wave. I think it's going to be a good race. I don't think, and I do not predict that this is going to be one that the Thorns run away from by any means. I don't think it's going to be a breakaway Shield win, but I think the Thorns are going to be in that race. And if you can sort of close this stretch strong, they really will set themselves up well. Not only for that World Cup period, in which I think this is a good enough team still to get results, but when they get back, I think closing this strong puts them in a position to be really difficult to beat in that race.
Yeah, they've said it from the start this season that they want to be the first ever Shield winners and champions in the same year for the Portland Thorns. Somehow that has not happened yet with this team that has been so successful over its first decade in the league, been the most successful team in NWSL in its first decade.
They play like they played last week. It's going to happen.
Exactly. The Portland Timbers played a match.
Oh, wait, are we going to talk about this?
Yeah, I think we are.
All right. I mean, we don't usually talk about the kids game that they have on the field before the game, but I mean, we can, I guess.
It was a rough watch for sure. I think to start with a positive note, I think a very strong defensive performance from the Timbers that allowed them to get this result, but that was aided by some thorough incompetence on the part of Seattle, one of their worst performances as of late with the ball at their feet. Just not a whole lot going on the other end for the Timbers. They just didn't really the surface, the time of day, that doesn't help. But at the end of the day, it was just not a terribly inspiring performance generally. Gio wasn't satisfied with it. He's like, yeah, we got the point, but where we're at in the table, we need 3 points in these situations, and we need more even after that, which is true. And I'm glad that he acknowledged that. But at the same time, they are where they are. It's not a terribly exciting time to be watching the Timbers lately. They've been struggling, to put it mildly, and then this game has the potential to uptick them a little bit, but it
literally didn't. They were at 1.07 points per game before, and they were on 1.06 points per game after. So
yeah, exactly. So they're just 1 point is
they lost like a few thousandths of a point per game in that one.
Yeah, and then they got FC Dallas on Sunday, which is not going to be an easy match. And Dallas over the last couple of years has been one of the tougher matchups for the Timbers. They've struggled both at home and on the road against Dallas. So it's especially on the road. So thankfully the Timbers don't have to travel down to Texas for this game, but they'll host them on Sunday. Your expectations for that game, maybe, since there really isn't a whole lot to talk about in the way of the Seattle game.
Yeah, I mean, the Seattle game, look, I mean, if we want to process, those of us who watched this undercard, if we want to process some collective trauma, I'm just going to verbalize what we all went through, which was we watched a deeply, deeply, deeply terrible soccer game. Just awful in much the way that, like, you know, aficionados of soccer would really like deeply appreciate the way the Thorns won against the Reign. This was the far, 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 far opposite end of the spectrum in terms of just an affront to everybody who likes soccer. And it was an abomination. From sort of the neutral's perspective, it was an abomination. What the teams, I think, combined for like 0.6 XG in the game, and single game XG is single game XG, right? It is subject to many variations, but like just watching, that was thoroughly deserved. That was right. To put that in context, if you're not an XG nerd, you know, usually if you're a single team that has 0.6 XG in a game, you probably lost. That's not good. You need to be generating more than that, and you need to be generating more than that consistently if you want to be consistent scores, right? I mean, that's like really just a mathematical point. But the teams combined for 0.6 XG. And the Timbers got their like 0.3 XG. They were roughly evenly split, depending on which metric you looked at. But the Timbers got their 0.3 XG on like 12 shots, which was the lowest XG per shot like the ratio that the Timbers have had in their MLS history.
Yeah, and I think the worst ever for a team that took 10 or more shots. And
yeah,
you know, people were upset about focusing on that point because of the defensive performance. And yeah, you know, kudos to them for holding Seattle. I mean,
let's put both teams' defensive performances in context.
Yeah,
neither team took any risks at all. You watch like old like movies of like medieval wars, like, you know, like Lord of the Rings or something like that, and like when the armies line up, they always like send a few guys out with like the flag to like talk to the guys on the other side to see if maybe instead of killing a bunch of people, they just want to like go home.
Yeah, or do like a one-on-one sword battle, like,
yeah,
you know, Jon Snow and Ramsay in Game of Thrones,
or some, you know, I mean, something where they're just like, all right, instead of doing this, maybe we should all just, you know, go home. They should have sent Gio and Schmetzer and Ladero and Chara out to midfield before this game to do that, because it would have been like the kind of thing where they're like, hey, everybody good with the point? Yeah, okay, cool. Let's just let the grown-ups take the field. Like, well, we don't need to do this. Nobody took any risks. Nobody. I mean, there was no attacking impetus from either team in the course of this game. And so, yes, both teams kept a clean sheet. Both teams can say, all right, we got some things right in defense. Yeah, all right, fair enough. But I mean, they answered all the questions right, but there were very few questions asked, and those that were asked were not particularly interesting. So, I mean, this was the point. It was a completely forgettable game. I think if you're the Sounders, who have been reeling a little bit, maybe you can justify that. I don't know. I don't think they're very happy with it. Brian Schmetzer didn't seem very happy with it after the game. If you're the Timbers and you're where you're at, you know, again, it's exactly what Gio said. A road point is a road point in ordinary circumstances. That's a perfectly fine thing. But the Timbers aren't in ordinary circumstances. They're in the race for the wooden spoon. And when you're in the race for the wooden spoon, a point in a game against the Sounders were very beatable. And the Sounders will say the same thing about the Timbers, and they're not wrong. But the Sounders were very beatable on Saturday, and the Timbers looked completely disinterested in trying to do that. And that, I think, should stick in Gio's craw a little bit, and should get them thinking about some of the decisions they made going into and during that game.
It also, and before we talk about the FC Dallas game, this was another thing that stood out to me that had nothing to do with what was happening on the field, but related. It was a bad game to watch, right? It was two teams in poor form that kind of just ran into each other at like the worst possible time, with the worst possible conditions at the worst possible.
The conditions weren't that bad. I mean, like I know that
down on turf though, like it's when it's hot and the sun's coming down, it's just like.
But it was like in the 70s. It's not like it was one of these like 92-degree days or something like that.
Right,
it
but
was
the way the ball
warm.
moves. The way the ball moves.
The Thorns in the rain managed to make an entertaining game out of it on the same field in the same weather. Like, come on.
But it was later in the day.
Slightly
different field. They watered the field before the Thorns game.
I mean, these are all just like there have been plenty of midday games at Lumen Field that have been competent soccer games. I mean, these are all excuses for, and they're pretty thin excuses for what was just a terrible game. And I don't mean to. Point to one team or another and making those excuses. It was just a terrible game.
Yeah, it was. And so leading into the larger point, the fact that like 42,000 people were there to watch that one, and then about half or less of them just got up and left. Look, I get that it's a long day. I get that if you got kids, you don't want to be out in the sun all day long. And after that soccer game, I don't know if I would feel like watching much more soccer if it wasn't my job, right? But I knew what was coming. I knew that the Rain and Thorns game was going to be a good one, and it turned out to be. But it's disappointing, and I pointed it out at the game that, like, you look out at the stands and to see them packed full at the start of a worse game, and the next game being a women's game and half of the people are there is frustrating. It's probably frustrating for the players. It's frustrating for people associated with the league. Major props, obviously, to everybody who stayed or even just showed up
and they were rewarded with a good game.
Yeah, and they were rewarded. It was
I imagine that's cold comfort for Rain fans, but like it was just a good soccer game. Yeah,
it was. And but yeah, the overarching point being it is disappointing to see that happen. There's a long way to go for equity of treatment when it comes to soccer in this country. And it's awesome that many people were there. It might have been, in fact, it was a record for a Rain game, just the amount of people that stuck around. But it can be better. It can absolutely be better, and it would have been nice to see even like 3/4 of the people.
Disappointing, but not surprising. I mean, it speaks to just the stuff that we all know about, right? That's obvious in the way women's sports are treated versus men's. I mean, it's sort of a stark example of that, right? Because you had a very good product from a women's game that got half or less than half of the people, then a very bad product in a men's game. And so it was kind of just like, it was that comparison just put in very stark terms, but it's the dynamics that we've known, especially, I think we just have to acknowledge it with the Rain in particular, that they have not done a good enough job of capitalizing on the soccer interest in Seattle. And, that is different from the Thorns and the Timbers. That disparity is not nearly as stark in terms of interest and that kind of thing. But, so I agree with you that it's frustrating and it's disappointing, but it's also not new. It's certainly not new. It is very old. It is a stark example of the same headwinds that we've known about and that we've been fighting and trying to fight through for a long time.
Yeah. And the biggest issue to me is the idea that you purchased tickets to the doubleheader. You didn't buy tickets for
Let's Play
one
2.
and not the other. It's a Let's Play 2 thing. It was advertised as such, and they gave the prime time slot between the two to the Thorns and the Rain. The game where the sun, most of the time you're watching the game, is not beating down on you depending on where you are in the arena. And
Put on some sunscreen and a hat.
And people would rather go to like a sports bar, and they'd rather like go, or they'd rather go home. And that's lame, man. Like these are people whom a lot of your sons and daughters are going to be watching and cheering on and learning about the game from when they're in the World Cup in a couple of months. The onus is on soccer fans to do more. I agree that the organization, bears a great deal of that responsibility, particularly in Seattle, just trying to maintain that equity. I do think there is more that can always be done in the Portland side. I think Portland does a better job than anybody in finding that balance, but there's just so much more to be done here. It sucks so bad to be in 2023 and to look out from the glass windows in the press box and see just such a stark difference. It's lame.
But at the end of the day, maybe the positive side of this is from just a purely objective soccer perspective, not a partisan, I support this team or that team perspective, just a purely objective soccer perspective. Who are the suckers? Who are the suckers here? It's the people who walked out because they had to watch the traumatically awful game, right? They watched the terrible game and then they walked out before the good one. It's like it's like showing up to a concert, going to the opener, thinking the opener maybe stinks a little bit, and then Beyonce walks on the stage, and you walked out before Beyonce. All right, you're the sucker. Sorry.
Yeah, you paid for the floor seats and you didn't even get to see Beyonce.
That's right. You paid for the floor seats. You saw, some like local band, and then because you were ignorant about what was coming next, you bailed before something special happened. And before you got what you thought you were paying for, which was good soccer and a good game. And so, I agree that these are the same dynamics we've been. These are the same dynamics that we've been dealing with for a long time. But has there ever been can you remember a clearer example of why people who aren't willing to give women's soccer the time of day are just turning their back on something that's very, very good, and often turning their back on something that's very, very good for the sake of watching something that is not always very good, and in this instance was very bad. So they're the suckers. The people who walked out are the suckers. The people who got what they paid for and what they wanted are the folks who wore sunscreen, wore a hat, and got a snack between the games and a drink of water, and came back for the second one, because that second one was worth watching and worth paying for. The first one, not worth paying for.
And I think that there are some people for whom staying out that long isn't tenable, but there's also people who, they'd be out that long.
Then don't come for the opener.
Yeah, exactly.
Come for the main event.
Come for the better one if you're going to pick one of the two. And there are people who are in that category who will stay out in the sun for like 6 hours, 7 hours, watching their kids play at some like rec center somewhere. Like, it's the same thing. There are valid reasons, there are excuses, but at the end of the day, you're missing out on the better product. And so much of this stuff is just baked into our culture that like it's a long road to fixing it. But on the positive side, I do think that the fact that attendance numbers in NWSL are going up as much as they are, the fact that for a afternoon game against the Red Stars, a team that is not even close to a rival of the Thorns, that isn't even close to the level of the Thorns, that 21,000 people would pack into Providence Park for that game. Those things, along with the league-wide growth is something that people should hang their hat on and be happy about. It's not close to where it should be, but it's definitely progress. And I think we absolutely should laud that as well.
I mean, folks are figuring out, more folks are figuring out, not as many as should, that NWSL and women's soccer presents a Beyonce level product. A lot. In many, many instances. It's very good if you like soccer. Those who showed up for Timber Sounders got Nickelback. So here's shout out to all the suckers who watched Nickelback on Saturday and walked out before Beyonce.
Speaking of stars, there's a gentleman who's joining Major League Soccer who we would be remiss if we did not discuss, at least briefly. Lionel Messi, the arguably greatest player in the history of this sport.
The greatest player in the history of the sport. I get sick of the arguably stuff. He's at that point now.
I'm a journalist. I get scared of like having opinion on anything. It's terrifying. But the greatest player of all time, Lionel Messi, coming to MLS to play for Inter Miami, expected to join the club in probably late July, early August. Pretty insane moment for the league. I mean, there have been aging stars that have come to this league before. David Beckham, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and Pele, obviously back in the old days,
NWSL days.
Yeah. And so there has been this type of movement before, but never this caliber of person, right? He's an institution. He's an icon of the sport, and you're already seeing ticket prices soar for the games that they have on the road, including ones, by the way, that are in places that he's not going to be playing yet, like DC, where my brother lives. He was, looking at their tickets just for fun, and they were $300 minimum for July 8th, the game that he will definitely not be playing in, barring some insane, change of plans here, because he's a PSG player until June 25th. So it'd be crazy if he was playing in that game. He won't be. So, but the news itself is massive for MLS. We don't know all of the details of his deal quite yet, but equity in Adidas or profit sharing, I should say, in Adidas, and profit sharing in the Apple TV subscription model, which is wild. Potential ownership stake down the road. And I've seen people talk about it. I don't know if it's 100% true, but other MLS teams potentially paying in to help finance this dude's contract.
Yeah, I don't buy that directly in terms of, I think that's probably a mischaracterization of what the profit sharing arrangements are, because those profit sharing arrangements are fairly characterized as sort of league resources going to help pay Messi's salary. But I haven't seen a lot of firm reporting on actual money coming out of other teams' pockets to pay Messi. I think that would be crazy and scandalous if that was the case.
It would, and unless you're getting something out of it, like there's like a Messi victory tour type thing where every team in the league gets a home game with him showing up,
and with him playing for them,
and he better be playing, right?
I haven't seen a lot of solid follow up reporting on that. I think that's probably a mischaracterization of the more solid reporting we've seen in the last few days, which is that there is a sort of tie-in with the app, with additional subscriptions to Apple TV and additional sort of revenue to Adidas as a result of this move. Got to figure that's like a cut of Messi jersey sales and that kind of stuff. But look. So first of all, it's going to be exciting and fun because Messi, even at his advanced age, is still a very, very, very good player. The dude won the Golden Ball in the World Cup 6 months ago. So he can still play. And for how long, I don't think we know. But he's going to be a very good player in MLS, right? And it's going to be fun to see him. There's also going to be some level of absurdity, including people buying tickets to games that he's not going to play in, and paying through the nose for tickets to games that he's not going to play in. The one that I'm particularly looking forward to, and I think something like this is probably going to happen along the way, is even after he's with Miami, there will be sort of an unannounced excused absence for a game where he won't be, and he'll turn up in Baku on some on some marketing venture, and it'll be an excused absence. There's going to be some level of absurdity like that, and the league is just going to tolerate it because it's Messi.
Yeah, like a minor injury even too, or a injury quote unquote.
Yeah,
that's going to keep him out for a game, and then there's going to be people that pay thousands of dollars for these tickets
to go watch Rodolfo Pizarro play for Inter Miami
and Joseph Martinez.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Joseph is sometimes worth the cost of admission. And Miami's going to have to do some figuring with respect to the salary cap situation. My plea to MLS, and so there have been some people who have bellyached a little bit about the use of league resources for the competitive benefit of one particular team. I think those are fair points to make. Anybody who's been around MLS for a while is not surprised by that. That has been done many times in the past, and it's been a fair gripe that a lot of those league resources have gone to the benefit to the LA Galaxies and the Seattle Sounders and now the Inter Miamis of the world. And I think those are all very fair points. This is not even the most egregious example of that. In the past, like, actual rules have been bent or broken for the purpose of doing that. Here, it's not so much a matter of rules being broken as it is just leveraging these league resources to help Miami sign a player. Still think that's objectionable, but I mean, if anybody is clinging to the idea that MLS is sort of this agnostic level playing field enforcing force within the league in this environment, I don't know what you've been paying attention to. It's just not that. And so, I mean, none of this is particularly shocking. My plea, though, because there's been lots of talk about Messi and friends coming, Inter Miami has they have 3 filled DP spots right now. They have still sanctions from their previous cheating when they hid payments to Blaise Matuidi to get him signed on a fraudulent TAM contract. My plea to MLS is not to bend or break rules to allow the and friends to be signed. If Miami can, within the rules, make the moves that they need to bring in, whether it's Busquets or Di Maria or whoever, then fine, great. But please don't and if MLS is going to change the rules for everybody, if MLS is going to get rid of some of the interfencing or open up the internal transfer market for everybody, fine. I mean, maybe you're doing it for the wrong reasons, but those are the right steps. So fine. But please don't let Miami sign players to obviously fraudulent TAM contracts. Frankly, as the Matuidi one was. When Miami signed Matuidi to a TAM contract, there were raised eyebrows everywhere. That was a World Cup winner being signed to a contract that was supposed to be under what was probably 1.5 million per year at the time. Give me a break. And it turns out that was exactly as fraudulent as it looked. And so, and they ended up getting sanctioned for it. Maybe MLS headquarters should sanction itself for credulousness. But please don't do that again. That's just the kind of thing that is a bridge too far and undermines the competitive credibility, frankly, of MLS. So that is my plea. But I'm excited about Messi. I think it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to watching him, and I think it has the potential to be sort of shepherding in a new era for MLS. I don't think it's guaranteed to do that, but it's got that potential.
Yeah, I think if you do things right, it definitely has that potential to grow the game as that's the constant talking point from people in the media, from people in power, right? Is the idea that, something like this is inevitably going to help grow the game in the United States and more legitimize MLS. And that is very possible, but I do think that there is also a possibility that this is one of those flash in the pan, like cash grab to end all cash grabs type situations. Yep. Where they make a ton of money in the short term and then Messi retires and then
all that attention goes away.
Yeah, you're back to where you were before. And you don't want that. Like PSG lost millions of Instagram followers as soon as Messi said he wasn't going to stay there. And that's not a
Miami got
or anything, but
Miami got like 4 million more.
Yeah, they all moved over to Inter
But that's
Miami's
exactly the
IG.
cautionary tale.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that's right. I mean, there have been lots of very obvious sort of calls back to the situation with David Beckham. And there have been, I think, pretty compelling arguments made in recent years that not only did the Beckham signing lead to sort of a short-term increase in interest, but it did sort of help lay the groundwork for longer-term transformation and growth within MLS. And I think that's exactly the hope that with the Messi signing for the league, right? I think it is far from obvious that is going to be the result. MLS is frankly now just in a very different phase than it was in 2007, 2008 when Beckham signed. It's in a very different spot. And will a signing like this have long-term effects with the league in the place that it is? Or will it be, more of a flash in the pan? And if it is the flash in the pan, frankly, my guess is economically it won't work out for MLS. And it won't be worth the investment. I think the upfront investment that Miami and MLS are making only makes sense if it leads to longer term transformation and growth. And then there are and need to be serious questions within the league office about the structure of the league and how to best position the league to capitalize on that kind of long-term growth. Because frankly, I think if we're coming out of this and we still have all this ridiculous interfencing and artificial deflation of kind of the second of salaries and transfer fees for kind of the second tier of players in the roster under DPs, I think the league will not be well positioned to take advantage of any long-term effects from Messi. And so, but a lot of that is also tied into collective bargaining negotiations that the league, maybe now regretting some decisions, extended the effect of over COVID. I think that was pretty short-sighted. And they may now be reconsidering some of those things. So, I think that is, which is all to say that all of that is very complicated. But if they're not having that conversation, they're going to put themselves in a materially worse position to have lasting effects than if they get serious about those structural issues. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. In the short term, it's going to be fun, right? Because the same people who appreciate good soccer, who were deeply offended by the performance of the Timbers and Sounders over the weekend. Look, there's some good stuff coming from Lionel Messi, right? There's a reason he is the greatest of all time. And there will be some joys that come from having the opportunity to watch him in MLS competition week in and week out. But the longer term questions I think are bigger questions. It's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out and how the league positions itself to try to capture those long term benefits.
And how does it relate to Portland? Well, here's the two opportunities you have to see Lionel Messi at Providence Park this season. The Timbers make a run to the League's Cup final and host it, which I don't even think is necessarily possible. I think the League's Cup final has a neutral location. And your Portland Timbers make the MLS Cup playoffs and have a better record than Inter Miami. And
Miami makes the playoffs, which by the way is no
Miami makes the
playoffs,
well. Which they're dead last in the East right now. And so if those two teams make the playoffs, Timbers have a better record. They both make a run to MLS Cup. You will have Lionel Messi in the MLS Cup final at Providence Park in this December.
Which of these two teams that are currently in the race for the wooden spoon, which do you regard as having higher upside in the second half of the season?
Let's see. The team that's adding Lionel Messi or the team that is not, but has
that is currently making ostensibly tactical switches for one of its best players to play Eric Miller.
Yes. I mean, Miami, but structurally, the team is theoretically better in Portland.
Is it?
So,
I mean, I
see.
think Miami has a few more injury issues that they're having to fight through. Their central midfield has just totally been gutted. And
there's a good fix. There's a good fix for that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
it's
been more on the defensive end of things in their defensive central midfield than their attacking. But Messi's going to make them a lot better. I think both rosters are pretty flawed, which comes through in spades in both of their records. I think Messi covers up more flaws than. I don't even know what the comparison would be.
Well, let's not compare. Let's be fair to everyone involved and just not compare anybody to Messi here in terms of their impact in MLS, because it's going to be some special stuff. Even for a Miami side that has been woefully bad this year, it's going to be really fun to watch. So
yeah, it'll be fun.
We will look forward to that. That'll wrap up the discussion today for us here on Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clark. Thanks to Chris Reifer, as always, for his analysis on this wonderful pod. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at SoccerMaidenPDX, at Chris Reifer, and at Ryan T. Clark. Like us, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review if you so choose, and we will see you next week.